Georgy. If you haven't met me already, I'm one of the two leaders of the Hydroclimate2k project along with Matt Jones. And in this quick video, I'm going to give you a little tour of our project drive. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, hiding the video panel. Okay, so hopefully you have been given access to this. This is our project Google Drive. This is where everybody from the entire project works. So you are probably a member of one particular archive group, but we're all working in here. And so if once you have access to the drive, this is the very top level. This is what you'll see. When you first go to this, I strongly suggest bookmarking it. Here's my bookmark up here, Hydroclimate2k, just for easy reference. So a lot of the work that you do will probably be in your specific archive folder. So that's here in this folder called archive folders. So I spend most of my time in the lake group. So here we've got a group for the lake sediment people. This is all the things I'm working on. But whatever group you're in, you'll have your own folders here. And so what happens in there is sort of dictated or run broadly by your archive leaders. So I'll leave that for them to go through. But otherwise, I'll just go through what's in here, what's common for everybody. And mainly what I want to show you are this little group of files that live in the top level of the project drive, and they're sort of your handy reference docs that as you're getting used to sort of the Hydroclimate2k database compilation project. So I'll just step through what they're there so you know where you can go to find some information if you're getting a bit stuck. So what we have here, this is the criteria for dataset inclusion in the database. So this is one you'll probably refer to quite a lot until you get to know that sort of off by heart. And these are the things that, as you're assessing a particular data set or some number of variables from a data set, this is, the criteria they have to pass to be included in our database. So first and most importantly is that at least one variable from the data set has to be interpreted by the authors of the data set to be primarily a hydroclimate record. Then we have a criterion related to resolution and one criterion related to the chronology. So it varies slightly whether it's an annually banded record or a non-annually banded record. Okay, so that file there, that shows you that's the criteria for inclusion in the database, and that lives here in the top level of our project folder. Another probably equally handy file is this one, definitions for each field in the QC sheet. Now I'll get to the QC sheet in a second. You might not have seen that yet. If you have, you'll know what I'm talking about. But, one of the foundational aspects of our Hydroclimate2k database is that it includes this really important interpretation metadata, which is included alongside each record in the lipid file, and it's what will ultimately allow users to safely interpret all these different data types from different archives from different proxies. There's also some more basic metadata, of course, things like the site name, the latitude, the longitude, the proxy type, all that sort of thing. And so you'll be adding that metadata information into the QC sheet, which probably I should have shown you this before. It's all right. But what this sheet is, the definitions sheet, is there is a row here for every metadata field. They're color-coded to match what you'll see in the master QC sheet. And so we have the field name, any other notes that might be important. For example, do not edit this field. The definition, so this describes what goes into that field, whether or not it's compulsory for variables that are part of our database, if it's a controlled vocabulary or not, Some of these might not currently be a controlled vocabulary, but will end up being, if there's a link to any prescribed entries and at what stage of the process these are entered. So some of these are very straightforward, things like archive type, and that's, coral or tree wood, lake sediment, rain sediment, whatever. Some publication information. This is very important so that ultimately when the database is published, users can cite both the actual original data records as well as the database. Latitude, longitude, these things, of course, all of the metadata you get from the paper. The original publications, you read through it and you go to the methods generally and you'll get the site latitude, longitude, elevation. These two fields here, I've coded in red. You don't have to fill those in, they're automatically calculated. Then we start getting to the more slightly complicated ones where it might be useful to have this sheet for reference. So things like the variable name, the units, the type of variable, that's measured, which is something you'll measure directly, you'll observe it or you can measure with an instrument, versus inferred, which is where you might have to be entering sort of reconstructed values, a few other bits and pieces. And then here we get to the interpretation metadata. So I'm not going to go through that now. You can read about it. If you don't fully understand, you can, of course, ask me or Matt or your archive leaders, but that's the environment interpretation and the climate interpretation and the dynamical system. And each of those has supporting variables, things like the direction, seasonality, basis, all those sorts of things. So you can see the field names here and their definitions and whether or not they are compulsory for the variables that you're going through. These two fields, also primary time series and in this compilation, again, I won't go through right now what they mean, but you'll hear me harping on about these a lot because these are extremely important metadata fields. They basically state, so for in this compilation, this is relevant for data sets that have more than one variable and when not all of those variables reflect hydroclimate. Read through here if that statement doesn't make sense to you yet. And primary time series is along similar lines. Okay, so that's the definitions. So, those two you'll probably be looking at a lot as you start entering metadata. Then next we have two essentially written recipes for how to add records to the database. And there are two of these. I'll just open one. There's guidelines for adding a new record, which is not currently available or visible in our master QC sheet. And then there's another one for assessing records that are already listed in our QC sheet, but which means they were inherited from a previous compilation, something like ISO2k or Coral Hydro2k or Sisal or something. So going through those and adding in our metadata, which is what is needed. But yeah, so both of these, they're essentially just a detailed written recipe of how to do it, of the steps taken to add a record to the database, add all its metadata. Yeah. It's quite long and complicated. It's probably going to be more useful once you've started going through the process as a reminder, but it's there for you to read through in any case. So there's those two. For both of those, there are associated schematics that I've made if you just want a little reminder. So there's one schematic for assessing data sets already in the compilation that were inherited from a previous database, or one for adding a new data set. I'll just look at one of these. And so this just shows the data set folder that sort of moves through our workflow. Hopefully our archive leaders have explained this to you, or otherwise I or Matt can. And this just, shows the process, for those who are more visual learners, shows the process. What else is here? There's also a README with some details about the project and where to find various things. You can have a poke around in that if you like. And then this is just one more handy reference doc that I've made, this thing called Lipid and QC Sheet Tips. And this just has a couple of, it just goes through very clearly a couple of things that can sometimes trip people up with respect to some of the terminology. So what is the meaning of data set versus variable in our particular database, which also applies in the lipid verse more broadly? What are variables? how that looks on the QC sheet, and then just a schematic that summarizes the lipid framework. Okay, so they're the sort of handy guides that live in the top level of our project folder. What else? I'll go through the QC sheet last. The other thing that is probably quite handy is this folder here, which is admin, including contact details. So in here, there are things like the authorship agreement, which sort of states how we're going to manage co-authorship of the database. So I suggest you have a read through that. Then there's this active member contact details list. I suggest that, someone's been filtering this, probably me. So here, this should be a list of all people who currently consider themselves to be active project members, which archive team/teams they're a member of, and their email address. So this is what I use to send emails to the project team. So probably maybe just check that you're on this. If you're not, add your name here, and also make sure you let me know, just in case, so if you're watching this video, you probably already have access to the Google Drive, but yep, so just make sure your contact details are up to date here. And then we also have this file here, which is the contact details of the archive leads. So if you've forgotten who your archive leaders are, you can go to this spreadsheet. This should be up to date. And, say you're in the marine sediment group, these are the people you would email for information about, project meetings, what's happening in your particular archive team. Okay, so that's in the admin folder. The last very important one is this folder, all caps, called QC Sheets. Now, this particular video isn't really the place for getting into it, but remember that in our database is essentially a big collection of lipid files, each of which has associated metadata. And the place where the metadata is entered is in this sheet here, which is called a QC sheet. That name is for historical reasons. Don't worry about it too much. It could also be called the metadata entry sheet. Right. And so every time the database is updated, this QC sheet is updated. And this sheet here that I've opened up, this is directly connected to the database. So this is where you actually enter the metadata that becomes a part of the database. And so in this sheet, there is one row for every variable of every data set. For every lipid that is currently included in the database. The first version of this, which we're actually still very close to, was simply made by combining a whole lot of existing lipid format databases, so like ISO2k, the Holocene Hydroclimate database, so I saw a few others. So actually not all of these are officially stated as part of our database. For that, we would need a true flag in this particular column here in this compilation. But this is where you'll be working to enter metadata into your various records. So for an example, here's one I've been working on recently. Here's a data set called for Alberca Lake. Remember that the data set name is always the site name and a full stop, then the author's name, then a full stop, then the year of publication. So we've got Alberca Lake, WOGA 2019. This particular data set, it's a lake data set. It has 3 variables, so 3 rows here. Here are the 3 proxies. You can see here I've only filled in metadata for 2 of these because one of them is not hydroclimate relevant, so it's marked as false in this compilation. But yeah, so I've entered this metadata since the last time the database was updated. So next time there is a database update, this interpretation metadata that I have got from the paper and entered into the QC sheet will be formally added to the database, and it's part of the database. Okay. So this is the QC sheet. It lives, so here's our project folder. It's in this folder QC sheets. There'll only ever be one here, and it will be the current 1, you can see we're up to version 0.2.7. The previous one was 0.2.6. I'll go through, I'm going to make another video of how to manage the QC sheet, because if you think about it, this could get a bit messy if lots of people were working on it at the same time, but there it is. And the only other thing is, so this is the tab you'll be working with metadata entry. There's also this other tab here, data sets in compilation. There'll be more information about this elsewhere, but essentially this is just a listing of every single data set that exists in the lipidverse. So not every variable of every data set, just one row for every data set. So there's many thousands. And then any data set that is currently included in our QC sheet here is marked true. And data sets that are not currently included on our QC sheet here are marked false. Okay. So if there was, say one of these records, you wanted this record to be included on our QC sheet, you've gone through and checked it against our criteria for inclusion in the database and found that it passes, you would simply change this flag here to true. And then at the next database update, all variables from this data set will appear in the QC sheet. Okay, I hadn't meant to go through this in this particular video. There we go, some added information if you have watched this far. Okay, so that's a brief tour of our project database. So our project Google Drive. So you should have access to this. Here in the top level is where you find all the handy guides. In archive folders, this is probably where you'll be doing most of your actual work. You'll be storing the documents where you're making notes about metadata. And in this folder here, QC sheets, this is where you find the master QC sheet where you'll actually be entering the metadata, which ultimately becomes a part of the database. Okay, so hopefully that's a bit of help.